Once upon a time, there was a brave and industrious teacher who was given the noble task of teaching English in an adult education center. She vowed that she would be the finest English teacher there ever was. She spent her spare periods with her index finger first rifling through grammar workbooks and then glued to the start button of the copy machine. She read and reread the stories she had learned about when she was in school, finding nuances that weren't previously evident to her, and thought, "Oh, I have to tell my students about how this sentence is not about the protagonist's love of apples, but really his desire for, oh, tee-hee, can I say that in class? How daring, I will. How interesting, this will be such a good lesson," she thought. She was truly going to be the finest English teacher there ever was. Finally, it was time to teach. She handed out the texts and started to talk about what they would be reading and discovering together. She told them and showed them and told them some more. "All right then, enough of me talking. Any questions before you start to read?" She looked up expectantly with an eager smile on her face and saw a room full of students. Some writing, others texting, some staring, a few with their heads on their desks. They must listen better that way. One hand was up and our teacher excitedly jumped on it. "Yes?" "Is this for marks?" "Well, of course, everything you do helps to lead you towards your final evaluation, which will certainly be for marks," she answered, her enthusiasm waning only slightly. "No other questions, then? Get to it!" And she sat down at her desk, the most tired teacher there ever was. Does this story sound familiar? One can certainly argue that this teacher is teaching. She researches, plans, lectures, presents, asks her students to read, but are her students learning? I'd argue that the only one doing any learning here is the teacher. We can be so stuck in our mental model of what teaching looks like that we forget about what it is we are actually meant to be focused on: student learning. As our teacher demonstrates at the end of her lesson, those old mental models are exhausting because the teacher is doing all of the work. We know that when we do, we learn. So why is it that so many of us are still the ones who are doing most of the doing in a classroom? How do we shift our mental models? The easiest way is to do just that, shift. Our teacher was so involved in her subject that she forgot her students. Too often we try to teach things like language or math through the sum of its parts. We insist that students know how to conjugate verbs, deconstruct sentences, do their multiplication tables, before we allow them to use language and to do math. And still, they struggle. They struggle with learning decontextualized bits and parts despite our best intentions of teaching them what we feel they need to know. It's time to question what we do in our classrooms, to ask ourselves if what we are teaching is indeed in line with the end-of-course outcomes for our students. And just as importantly, to ask ourselves how we measure the impact of what we do in our classrooms. If our students are not successful despite our hard work, it's time to make a change. Okay, so we accept the fact that a lesson taught is not necessarily a lesson learned. Now what? Well, what if instead of telling our students what to learn and how to learn it, we ask them big questions and challenge them to find out more? It's this shift from the subject to the student, from providing the answers to asking open questions that require students to find the answers that will make learning relevant to them. A wonderful side effect of this is that our teaching becomes all the more relevant and so much less exhausting as we hand over the starring role to those who should be doing the performing in the classroom in the first place: our students.